Did you know that more than 70% of all AI projects are likely to fail, not because of technology, but due to poor data readiness and potentially ineffective change management? So, this is Future Bytes, and I'm Magnus Oxenwaldt, your host. And today we have a special guest, Mike Sims, who brings deep insights into making data the backbone of AI success. So today we'll explore why data readiness is the cornerstone of all successful AI adoption projects. We'll go through like common pitfalls and strategic approaches and practical insights, all to get your organization AI ready. So with that, hi Michael, and welcome to the show. Before we deep dive into the data readiness, could you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, Magnus. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I've heard good things about it so far, and of course, we've met a couple of times, and been very impressed with some of the knowledge that you bring to the table as well. My name is Mike Sims. I've been in the data and AI space for going on 30 years now. Work at Columbus Global in the U.S. market. I'm the VP of Data and AI there. Uh, been working on a number of different AI initiatives and AI projects, as well as doing some other things around the data readiness realm and governance to try to help companies that run into some of these issues that we're going to talk about today. Thank you again, Magnus.
Brilliant. Good to have you here, and thanks. So let's to kick off things off. Um, uh, Data readiness. For me, it could be a buzzword. I've read a lot about it, but in order to get some context to the listeners, could you break down the concept of data readiness before we touch all the knowledge around it for our listeners?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to have the Oxford Dictionary version of this. I'm going to have my perspective on it, but data readiness to me has a couple of different facets to it, and it's very in many ways related closely to data governance and the entire enterprise governance. And I think, as you said in your intro about readiness of the organization, data readiness in particular, though, has to do with having the correct data, obviously, for what we're trying to do as just like a very high level. When you dig down a little bit deeper and you get into that, okay, we have the actual data that we want to use or that we need to use. It's determining, um, at the micro level, more things like metadata correctness. Also, what is the domain of the data that we have then? Is the data in some way skewed or are we missing data? How do we fix that type of data? And then also in a number of ways, and this is the big one, the quality of it. I touched on a couple of those facets of quality, but in a lot of cases, we run into data that just isn't right, even though the data types are correct or whatever. It's just wrong data. A good example, about 20 years ago, I was involved in a data migration, not really an AI project, but it's a similar concept here with what I'm going to talk about. And we had in the state field in the US, we had 251 different states. And that was because of the limitations of the system itself and what we had to program around to get it to work. So that's just one small field. And you can imagine if you're using hundreds of fields, how you have to go through that analysis of the data to ensure that you're getting what you really, really need.
Yeah. So data readiness is essentially something people are doing all over the place, but they might not have put this word onto it or calling it that.
Mhm.
And but is data readiness the same now today as it was like 5 years ago? Because you've been doing this for a while. Um, you seeing cleaning data and it sounds like very generic everything. Um, is it hard to get in a place where you have a good plan around data readiness?
It can be, especially if you have multiple sources and large data sets, trying to synthesize all of that data. But it really is fundamental blocking and tackling is what I call it of data architecture and slash engineering 101. Do I have the right data that I need? And how do I, first off, how do I determine what data I need? But Do I have the correct data once I've determined that? And then looking at that data and doing what we call an exploratory data analysis to not only analyze the data for what it actually presents to us, but to determine whether or not we have data that we just either don't know what to do with because the company has had some type of anomaly in their system, or it is just a function of the system itself that's producing these results. There's a number of facets that go into it. So it can be complex, but
Mhm.
in most cases, it's more what we call an orchestration of all of this data into one cohesive uh, domain for us to utilize in this particular instance, AI.
Yeah. I know you're an expert both in data and AI, and the recent AI everybody's talking about is generative AI, right?
Sure.
So it's a lot of talk about that. It consumes most of the news space. And in one of your recent blogs, um, you highlight the generative AI's role in this data readiness concept. How should companies realistically like integrate to generative AI and into their broader AI strategies with this in mind, with data readiness? How do you see it shifting, or is it more important now, or has it ever always been, same importance, but they weren't aware of it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's as important. It's always been very, very important, but historically, the systems that would bubble this information up would be reporting systems or analytics systems. And we would blame the report. The report's wrong is the classic answer. And I'm sorry if the report's passed the vetting process and it's actually gotten through and it's in production. More than likely, it's not wrong. There's a data anomaly, and reporting and
Yeah,
analytics historically were used a lot of times to identify processes that needed to be fixed or improved upon because they were generating data that were maybe outside of what we wanted. From a Gen AI perspective, Gen AI is a very, very powerful tool out there, and vendors like Microsoft and some of the other companies that are out there proliferating these tools in mass to the public. It does present a challenge, I think, for many companies because you're now exposing your data. So which data do you want to expose? Which data do you need to not expose because it's more sensitive? You need to define business rules as to how you're going to utilize these things. And as
mm,
you probably know, and I think you do know, like I think the first time I heard the term hallucination was from you actually.
yeah,
You can you need to determine how to trust these tools so that if they do have a hallucination or something like that, that you know how to handle those things.
yeah, yeah. A very very good point. From your experience, um, trying to get into this data readiness and having a roadmap for that to support, whatever AI projects that's upcoming. What are you feeling is the biggest misconception executives might have about data readiness? I mean, you have all these conversations back and forth. I assume they think something in the first meeting, but probably think something completely different after having discussions with you.
Well, there's a couple things. I think the first thing is what I call assuming the data.
Mm,
And that has been around in all of the data projects that I think forever I've ever done. You assume that
yeah,
the quality of the data is good. You assume that you have access to the data. You assume that the data is secure. You assume all of these things because they're behind the scenes and whatever backend system you're using, whether it's SQL Server or Oracle or,
yeah,
AS400, doesn't really matter. Those people are the quiet ones typically that or you don't hear from them. They're not necessarily in leadership. They're the DBAs or whatever. And they do their thing, um, in order to keep that data, out there for people and available to use. Um, I think that the new data readiness though, because companies are realizing that they need all of this data and a lot of data for AI,
mm,
that data readiness has been brought more to the forefront. So what systems am I using? So now it becomes a system question, I think. What systems am I using? Oh, SharePoint. Oh, that's not real good when you start digging underneath the surface because that's basically the wild, wild west of systems. You can put anything you want into a SharePoint system
yeah,
and
yeah,
and it will come out. So now you have these what are called NoSQL databases, and then you have these unstructured databases, but you really need to get down into some type of a structure in order
Mm,
for AI to consume it. And I think most importantly, for AI to be able to consume it with controls around it and understanding that it's going to behave within these parameters. Because
yeah.
AI, or at least the current version of AI, is essentially we're automating or we're augmenting or we're building some type of a construct to come up with some type of result set that's within a certain set of parameters. It's not just
Yeah.
wide open. And so how we feed that particular model or we feed that particular Gen AI, LLM or whatever we're going to do determines what the final outcome is going to be. So it's very deterministic in a lot of ways. We do want it to be more stochastic, but we still have to program it and we still have to develop around it.
So I'm just gonna say it. Shit in, shit out, right?
Yeah, yeah, well, so there was the term garbage in, gospel out, right? But take it and you put it into a model, or previously when you used to print it out, we used to say garbage in, gospel out,
Yeah.
and it becomes the reporting system or the analytics system or now the AI system's full.
Yeah.
It's doing something, but it's really the garbage data.
Yeah. Bad system when in fact they haven't gone through their data readiness journey, right? In
Correct.
the correct way.
Correct.
So this gets really technical really quick. How should I, as a if I'm a business leader, where should I start? How should I like go about this?
Well, we recommend you start with a couple of things. First off, uh, a number of customers or prospects rather that I was working with last year, especially at conferences, would come up to me after one of my engagements. And I don't know if you had the similar experience. My CEO or my C whatever would say or said to me that I need to implement AI.
Mm,
Okay, what does that mean? That's the first question, right? Um, are you talking AI because at the time the new hotness was the LLMs and co-pilots that were out there that Microsoft was proliferating, or are you talking now we're going to do what I call a trad AI or traditional AI, build a model, for some type of a classification or some type of a
mm,
decision tree or something like that. What are you trying to do? So then that leads to the next question is, well, I don't know. So
yeah.
how do I determine that? And it really gets down to the fundamentals of business rules and determining what business problem and value you're trying to create. So this is non-technical yet. This is very business driven. The the model or the business problem you're trying to solve is going to determine what data you need to pull in. You have these large ERP systems, for instance, that have tens of thousands of tables and hundreds of thousands of fields. You're not going to use all of that data in your models. So determining your business value and then determining what use case you're going to align to, determining the parameters around that are going to determine what that model is going to do. That's
Mm,
the key there. And that's not a technical exercise, a quasi technical, but it's not completely a technical exercise yet. Once you get there, determining uh, what data you're going to use and then determining how that model should behave, then you get into the technical aspects of it and doing the exploratory data analysis, the feasibility analysis around that. Do we have enough data? Do we have the right data and so forth? That's a little bit more technical. You get the data scientists and or the data engineers involved. And then at that point, once you're ready, then you could start maybe building a POC or a prototype and then start looking at building out the model itself.
that sounds almost impossible.
But
What you're saying, you're going into a meeting with somebody. They have a bunch of money to spend, and you're telling them almost all this money you need to spend on something you won't even see. And then you're doing the
well,
project. How
you
do you
don't see
convince
it.
them? How do you convince them to do that when they want to spend all their money on, like, AI application immediately?
Well, that's the trick, right? Because we do the same thing with ERP systems when you think
Yeah.
about it. You don't see that ERP system for a while, or maybe you see bits and pieces of it or parts of it. That's why we recommend the prototype, because you can typically stand up a prototype or something like that in a fairly short period of time. It's going to be limited because you're going to only bring in part of the data or a very small subset of the data. You're going to scale it appropriately, and you're not going to necessarily have it on the production
Mm,
hardware or the production structure that you're going to use, because a prototype by definition is just proving that we're going to be able to do what we said we're going to do, and that this idea that the company has is actually going to bear the fruit that they think it's going to. So
Yeah.
that's the first key on that. It's not impossible. We've been doing it. It's just, it is a little bit bigger, sometimes than some companies, might realize. And in some cases, I think it's a little bit smaller. Um, I think a lot of there's been a little bit of reticence. I think a lot of that reticence has been around fear of AI and lack of knowledge around AI. Particularly, they think that AI projects are going to be very, very large dollar, very, very long time frames because they've heard horror stories. We typically can get AI projects up and running, a prototype in a couple of weeks and a working production model within a couple of months. And that's for traditional AI. For some of the smaller ones, we can get those going much, much faster. It's really determined by the business processes and the requirements that are necessary for this project to be determined a success.
Mm. But how in your latest
Mhm.
AI projects, how big of a portion was like focusing on AI readiness and the rest, let's say, is the actual AI application itself?
Yeah. So I think most companies are actually AI ready. I would put that in air quotes,
Hmm.
but in that they can find applications or they can find use cases that would apply to them and provide value. That's if you look
Like in
at
federated areas within their business, like
sure, yeah. Determining which one is a trick, that's a different, that's a different type of engagement. But we got
mm,
involved with the company last October. They've been a long time company of ours. Um, they had a particular problem that they wanted solved. They didn't really need prioritization meetings or any type of use case analysis. And they didn't really need an exploratory data analysis in their case because they kind of knew exactly what the data was that they needed. So they had already done a lot of that work. They were a little ahead of the ball game. We were able to stand up a prototype within a couple of weeks. And like I said, we started in October. We went into production in December.
that's
So
that's
not all companies are the same with
no.
regard to this. And some companies take a little bit longer because they're not as mature, quote unquote, as that company was and ready to go.
But then you're in a unique position because you know both aspects very well, which leads to the question: can you sort of split the engagement between data and AI, or are they intrinsically the same?
I don't think you can do AI without the data part in
No.
most cases. There are exceptions where you have a very strong data team or a company that is very well versed in data. But most cases, companies need a data platform or some type of construct built out to support their AI initiatives. At least that's what I've seen lately. That doesn't mean that that will be that way forever, of course. Companies are catching on to this and they are investing in data and they're investing in data platforms because they realize that, oh, yeah, if they're being honest, my data quality isn't where it needs to be, or my data governance or whatever
Mm.
aspect of data you want to talk about. So they're investing in that a little bit. Um, Not as much as I would like, obviously, because I'm in that particular domain, but um, I'm seeing more of it, and there's definitely more interest in that. You're seeing a lot of conferences pop up
Yeah.
specific to AI, and so there is a lot of
Any
interest.
practical advice? I mean, well, practical advice. If I were a company, where what would I actually do if I could do like one or two things within?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, most enterprises
they're
have.
siloed, right?
I'm sorry.
Most enterprises might be like siloed data.
That's
Uh,
yeah. Some of them are, and they're getting less and less. At the same
mm,
time, I'm still seeing a lot of them, but a lot of companies are making efforts to move more toward a centralized data repository, whatever that might look like, whether
yeah,
that's a cloud data lake or they have some type of a data warehouse or a lake house or something like that. There are still a lot of on-prem systems, a lot of companies that are
mhm,
on-prem. There are still a lot of AS400 systems
amazing,
and
but true.
mini mainframes. So there is an ongoing need slash effort out there to modernize data platforms from these legacy systems that are, believe it or not, in our becoming antique somewhat. Some of these
Yeah.
older systems, the green screens, for instance, and even some of the older on-prem ERPs. Um, Trust in cloud has gotten a lot more, but I think we're running the same curve with trust in AI that we ran on trust in cloud.
Yeah.
Um, and we're seeing that more people are interested in AI, but they really don't know where to go. So they're kind of shooting first and aiming
Mm.
next. And so you're seeing some bad implementations, but you're also seeing companies that are willing to raise their hand and say, "Hey, we need a little guidance on this. We got a good data team, but we really don't have the experts in data in AI, and we don't have the data scientists. So can you help us out? Can you guide us?" And it becomes a business transformation. And then you get to the actual AI piece of it. A significant portion of it is going to be data engineering and
Mm.
data readiness, but then you get into the actual technical pieces of it, of building that model out.
Are there any differences like in verticals um is it more in finance or more in retail? Do you see any differences there?
I Yeah, just in the volume of data.
Mm.
Um, you know, to me, data is data on the back end, and understanding the business problems is the crucial piece of it, and the key fields necessary to drive value and to drive that benefit. It really is going to change from industry to industry, but the fundamental problem is the same. When you look at manufacturing systems, you have high volume transactions from SCADA systems and machine systems that are just generating tons and tons and tons of data because they're taking readings every second. So these IoT devices on these machines that are measuring pressure and temperature and so forth, that's a lot of information. And it's very similar to what you see in retail and financials in terms of transactional volume. But
Mm.
determining the key fields that you need to build out whatever model or whatever AI construct that you need, that's the tricky part. And that takes a little bit of work.
Cool. I actually have one last topic to or we wrap this up. 20 minutes moves really fast.
Yes.
We'll try to keep it short and sweet. So one topic that comes up a lot of times in conversations is a growing topic about the ethical and privacy concerns with data.
Okay.
When you're getting engaged with and working with customers, how much is just data readiness in terms of cleaning data, and how much is talking about privacy and ethical data use?
Yeah. In all honesty, we haven't had a lot of dealings with the ethical piece of it because I think the way we construct this, the company owns their data,
Yeah.
and we are dependent on them to provide us access.
So
Uh,
they're in charge for that essentially, and you're
exactly, they're the gatekeepers of the data to us. Now,
mm,
that's not to say that there's not opportunities for some companies out there to look at those types of things. And I think there needs to be standards built around that and security offerings possibly to support that. But Copilot's a great example of that. If you let it go with all your data without, with impunity, it will. So you need to lock certain data down and provide personas that Copilot can go against, then that has access to only certain data. That's a sound first step, I think.
yeah. I mean, I can imagine they come back and ask for some support figuring this out more and more, given all the AI tools, right? So it's not just about cleansing of the data; it's actually what type of data exists, right? So it's more.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's more sensitive data out there that we typically don't see and get access
Mhm.
to, and more importantly, I don't want access to. So that is a part of what we do. But I depend on my team, and
Yeah.
they depend on the companies, obviously, to identify, hey, this doesn't really belong.
Cool. So let's sum this up. So today we kind of uncovered that why data readiness is critical to AI success. We tried to highlight some practical strategies, and I think we explored how businesses across various sectors also how it differs. So thank you for all the insight, Michael. But before we saying goodbye to the listeners, what if I should remember just one thing from this entire podcast, what would be the key takeaway from this podcast in your mind?
It's actually my tagline, my hashtag. It's all about the data.
It's all about the data. What a perfect ending for this conversation. So if every listener out there want to get to know more about from Mike, we're going to put the details in the descriptions for this podcast so they can reach out. But with that, thank you so much again, Mike, for joining me, and thanks for all you listeners.
Thank you, Magnus.